Power isn't about the money, it's about control. Roman Costa controlled the city's shipping ports, the politicians, and who lived or died. He didn't care about the invisible people who cleaned his marble floors. Until a Tuesday afternoon, when his quiet, subservient maid stood in the sunlit kitchen and smiled at the new mechanic. "You're way too handsome to be covered in grease," she laughed. Roman stopped in the doorway. He didn't just want control anymore. He wanted her. And God help anyone in his way. The bleach burned the back of Nora's throat. She knelt on the hardwood floor of the main study, an abrasive sponge in her gloved hand, scrubbing a dark, tacky stain near the Persian rug. She didn't ask what the stain was. You didn't ask questions in the Costa household. You scrubbed, you kept your head down, and you took the envelope of cash at the end of the week. Nora was 24, but her eyes held the exhaustion of a woman twice her age. Her father had died 2 years ago, leaving behind a gambling debt so massive it felt like a physical weight on her chest. The men who came to collect didn't care about apologies. They cared about collateral. Working off the debt in Roman Costa's private residence was the only deal that kept her breathing. She rinsed the sponge in the bucket. The water turned a pale, rusty pink. Definitely blood. The heavy oak doors of the study opened. Nora froze. She didn't look up. The rules were simple. Be invisible. Heavy footsteps crossed the floor. Italian leather over hardwood. The scent of stale cigarette smoke, expensive bergamot cologne, and a metallic tang filled the room. Roman Costa threw his suit jacket over the back of a leather armchair and poured himself a glass of amber liquid from the crystal decanter on his desk. He didn't acknowledge her. To Roman, Nora was a fixture, a broom, a rag, a necessity for maintaining the pristine illusion of his home. Roman was 32, built like a heavyweight fighter forced into a tailored suit. His jaw was covered in dark stubble, his eyes a flat, dead brown that gave nothing away. He ran the most violent syndicate on the East Coast with the ruthless efficiency of a corporate CEO. He was quiet. He didn't yell. The men who yelled were the ones who lacked real power. Roman could end a man's life with a subtle nod. He slumped into the chair behind his desk, exhaling a long, ragged breath. The ice clinked against the glass. Nora kept scrubbing. Her knees ached. The silence in the room was suffocating, heavy with the adrenaline of whatever violence Roman had just returned from. The corner. His voice was a low rumble. It scraped against the quiet. Nora blinked, her heart giving a dull thud. She dared to glance up. Roman wasn't looking at her. He was staring at his glass, but his finger pointed vaguely toward the edge of the rug. "You missed a spot on the corner," he said, flat, emotionless. "Yes, Mr. Costa." She shifted on her bruised knees, moving closer to his desk. She scrubbed the faint shadow of a footprint near the leg of his chair. He was close enough that she could see the faint speck of blood on the cuff of his white shirt. She held her breath, focusing entirely on the wood grain. Roman took a slow sip of his drink. He finally looked down. He saw the top of her head, the cheap cotton uniform, the frantic, desperate way she scrubbed the floor to appease him. It was pitiful. It was ordinary. He looked away, dismissing her existence entirely. "Leave it," he muttered a minute later, opening a leather-bound ledger. "Get me black coffee, strong." "Right away, sir." Nora gathered her bucket and rags, standing quickly. Her joints popped. She kept her eyes on the floor as she backed out of the room, pulling the heavy door shut behind her. Once in the hallway, she leaned against the wall and let out a shaky breath. This was her life. A ghost haunting a house of killers. She preferred it this way. Being noticed by Roman Costa was a death sentence. It meant you were a problem, a target, or a pawn. She was none of those things. She was just the girl who cleaned up the mess. Or so she thought. The estate's secondary kitchen was a massive industrial space used for catering large events. On a Tuesday afternoon, it was usually empty. Nora liked the secondary kitchen. The afternoon sun hit the tall windows perfectly, warming the stainless steel counters. It felt less like a tomb and more like a normal house. The espresso machine had been broken for 3 days. Nora was wiping down the countertops when the back door propped open. A man walked in carrying a heavy canvas tool bag. He wasn't one of Roman's soldiers. He didn't have the dead eyes or the rigid posture. He was wearing faded denim and a grease-stained gray t-shirt. He had a smudge of oil across his cheek, light brown hair falling into his eyes, and an easy, genuine smile. "Hey," he said, dropping the bag on the floor. It hit with a loud metallic clank. "You the one who called about the coffee machine?" Nora blinked, startled by the casual tone. Nobody spoke casually here. Yes. The housekeeper called. It's not holding pressure." "I'm Finn," he said, walking over to the massive chrome machine. He wiped his hands on a rag from his back pocket. "New mechanic for the motor pool, but apparently I fix appliances now too." He grinned at her. It was a bright, disarming smile. Nora hesitated. Her instinct was to nod and leave the room, but Finn was already pulling the front panel off the machine, whistling a quiet tune. He was normal. He felt like a memory from a life she used to have before the debts, before the blood on the floorboards. She kept wiping the counter, slowly inching closer. "Do you know what's wrong with it?" she asked softly. "Probably a blown gasket," Finn said, leaning over the machine. His bicep flexed against the tight fabric of his shirt as he wrenched a bolt loose. "People leave these things on all night. The boiler overheats. Simple fix, really." He glanced sideways at her. "You always this quiet, or is it just this house? Place gives me the creeps, honestly. Feels like a museum." Nora's breath hitched. She looked over her shoulder, terrified someone had heard him. "You shouldn't talk like that here," she whispered. Finn stopped. He looked at her, really looked at her, his expression softening. He saw the tension in her shoulders, the fear masking her pretty features. "Sorry, didn't mean to spook you. I just talked too much." He leaned against the counter, crossing his arms. "I'm just a guy fixing a machine. You're just a girl doing her job. Nothing creepy about that, right?" Nora looked at the grease smudge on his cheek. For the first time in 2 years, the tight coil of anxiety in her chest loosened just a fraction. A small, involuntary smile tugged at the corner of her lips. "You have oil," she said, pointing to her own face. Right there. Finn rubbed his cheek with the back of his hand, missing it entirely and smearing it further. Nora let out a quiet laugh. It sounded foreign to her own ears. It was light. It was real. "Here," she said, pulling a clean paper towel from the dispenser and dampening it. She stepped closer to him. The normal human interaction was intoxicating. She handed it to him. Finn took it, their fingers brushing briefly. "Thanks." He wiped the grease away. "How do I look?" Presentable? Nora smiled, leaning against the counter. She felt a rare spark of playful ease. You're way too handsome to be covered in grease, Finn. Stick to fixing cars. Leave the coffee machines alone. I'll keep that in mind, Finn chuckled, turning back to the machine. The heavy thud of a boot against the floor tiles echoed through the kitchen. Nora froze. The smile died on her face instantly. Roman stood in the archway. He wore a dark charcoal suit, his tie loosened. He looked like he had been standing there for a while. The temperature in the room plummeted. The sunlight streaming through the windows suddenly felt cold. Roman's face was an unreadable mask of stone, but his dark eyes were locked onto Nora. They were entirely black in the shadows of the kitchen. He didn't look at Finn. He looked at the space between Nora and Finn. He looked at the relaxed slump of her shoulders, which had now gone rigidly straight. He had heard her laugh. He had heard the word, handsome. Roman stepped into the room. His presence sucked the oxygen from the air. Is there a problem with the machine? Roman asked. His voice was quiet. Dangerously quiet. Finn, oblivious to the lethal shift in the atmosphere, turned around with a friendly nod. Just a blown gasket, Mr. Costa. I'll have it running in 10 minutes. Roman finally shifted his gaze to Finn. He stared at the mechanic with the clinical detachment of a man studying an insect before crushing it. He took in Finn's casual stance, his youth, his easy confidence. Did I ask for a timeline? Roman said. The words dropped like lead weights. Finn's smile faltered. The mechanic finally felt it, the oppressive, terrifying weight of the man in front of him. No, sir, just letting you know. Roman turned his head back to Nora. She was trembling. Her knuckles were white as she gripped the edge of the stainless steel counter. She was terrified. But a minute ago, she had been laughing. She had looked at this mechanic with warmth. She had looked at him like he was a man. Roman had never seen her smile. He realized with a sudden, sharp twist of something dark and violent in his gut that he wanted to rip the mechanic's throat out just for being the one to pull that sound from her. Nora, Roman said. Her name felt heavy on his tongue. He rarely used it. Yes, Mr. Costa, she choked out, her eyes fixed on his leather shoes. My office. Now. He didn't wait for her to answer. He turned and walked out, his footsteps echoing down the long hall. Finn exhaled a long, shaky breath, wiping sweat from his forehead. Jesus, guy is intense. He looked at Nora. You okay? Nora didn't answer. She couldn't. Her stomach was in a knot of pure panic. She practically ran out of the kitchen, chasing the echoing footsteps of the devil. Nora stood in the center of the study. The heavy oak doors were shut tight behind her. Roman stood by the large bay window, his back to her, looking out over the sprawling, manicured lawns of the estate. 1 minute passed, then 2. The silence was agonizing. Nora's heart hammered against her ribs like a trapped bird. She mentally reviewed every mistake she could have made. Did she misplace a document? Did she break something? Did he care that she was talking to the mechanic? No. Why would he? He was Roman Costa. He didn't care about the lives of the help. How long have you worked here? Roman asked, his voice low, still facing the window. 2 years, sir, Nora answered, her voice trembling. 2 years, he repeated slowly, testing the sound of it. He turned around. He leaned against the windowsill. crossing his arms over his chest. His dark eyes pinned her in place. 2 years of paying off a dead man's debt. 2 years of cleaning up after my men. 2 years of keeping your mouth shut. I always try to do my best, Mr. Costa. Roman stared at her. He really looked at her this time. He noticed the way her dark hair escaped the messy bun at the nape of her neck. He noticed the pale, fragile line of her throat as she swallowed hard. He noticed the cheap gray cotton uniform that hung loosely on her frame. She was ordinary. She was entirely beneath his notice. So why was his blood boiling? Why was the sound of her laughing with a grease monkey ringing in his ears like a siren? He pushed off the windowsill and closed the distance between them. Nora instinctively took a step back, but her heel hit the edge of the Persian rug. She was trapped. Roman stopped just inches from her. He was tall enough that she had to tilt her head back to look at his face. The scent of bergamot and danger wrapped around her. "You think you have free time in my house?" Roman asked quietly. "No, sir. The housekeeper asked me to show him where the machine was. I was just leaving." "You were laughing," Roman stated. It wasn't a question. It was an accusation. Nora felt a cold sweat break out on her neck. He made a joke. I was just being polite." "Polite?" Roman's jaw tightened. A muscle ticked violently beneath his ear. "You called him handsome." Nora's breath stopped entirely. Her mind raced. She couldn't read him. Was he angry about fraternization? Did he think she was slacking off? "I didn't mean anything by it, Mr. Costa. It was just stupid small talk. I swear. It won't happen again." "No," Roman said softly, his eyes dropping to her trembling lips before snapping back up to her terrified eyes. "It won't." He turned away from her, walking behind his desk. The intense pressure in the room lifted slightly, allowing Nora to drag oxygen into her burning lungs. "Starting tomorrow, your schedule changes," Roman said, opening a drawer and pulling out a file. "You no longer clean the East Wing or the guest quarters. You clean my quarters, my study, my private dining room." Nora blinked, confusion warring with the terror. "But Maria usually handles your private quarters, sir. Maria is being reassigned. You work directly for me now. When I am in the house, you are nearby. When I need something, you get it. You don't speak to the guards. You don't speak to the drivers." Roman looked up, his eyes flashing with a cold, possessive fire. "And you do not speak to the mechanics. Do you understand?" "Yes, Mr. Costa," she whispered, her head spinning. Dismissed. Nora turned and fled. She practically ripped the heavy doors open, stumbling into the hallway. She leaned against the cool plaster wall, pressing a hand to her chest. Her heart was beating so fast it hurt. She didn't understand what had just happened. She had been promoted to the most dangerous job in the house, serving Roman directly. Inside the study, Roman sat down heavily in his chair. He rubbed his face with both hands. He was losing his grip. He had spent his entire life building walls of ice, calculating every move, showing no weakness. But when he heard her call another man handsome, a primal, ugly rage had clawed its way up his throat. He wanted to break the mechanic's jaw. He wanted to lock Nora in a room where no one else could see her. He picked up the desk phone and pressed a single button. "Yeah, boss," a gruff voice answered on the other end. "The new mechanic, Finn," Roman said, his voice stripped of all emotion. "Get him out of my house." "You want him dealt with?" The enforcer didn't miss a beat. Roman hesitated. The image of Nora's bright, fleeting smile flashed in his mind. If he killed the kid, she would know. She would look at Roman with absolute hatred. "No," Roman said finally, his grip tightening on the receiver. "Transfer him to the shipping yards down at the docks. Put him on the graveyard shift. If I see him on this estate again, break his legs." "Understood." Roman hung up the phone. He stared at the spot on the rug where Nora had been standing. He had isolated her. He had brought her closer. He told himself it was to keep an eye on a potential security risk. He told himself he just didn't like his staff getting distracted. But as he sat alone in the quiet study, the truth settled over him like a suffocating blanket. He didn't just want her to work for him. He wanted to own every breath she took. And the unraveling had just begun. Roman's private quarters took up the entire top floor of the West Wing. It was a sprawling, silent fortress of dark mahogany, slate-gray walls, and floor-to-ceiling windows lined with bulletproof glass. Nora had never been up here. For 2 years, this floor had been a myth, a restricted zone guarded by heavy wooden doors and silent men in tailored suits. Now, it was her prison. It had been 4 days since the incident in the kitchen. 4 days since Roman Costa had rewritten the rules of her existence. Nora stood in the center of Roman's bedroom, a feather duster hanging uselessly from her gloved hand. The bed was massive, unmade, the dark gray sheets tangled. It smelled sharply of him: bergamot, dark roast coffee, and that underlying metallic scent of cold outside air. The intimacy of the space made her skin crawl. She was touching the sheets where he slept. She was wiping dust from the nightstand, where a loaded matte black handgun rested casually next to a titanium watch. She moved carefully, terrified of disrupting the exact geometry of his life. At exactly 6 o'clock, the heavy door clicked open. Nora froze, the rag in her hand suddenly feeling incredibly heavy. Roman stepped into the room. He didn't wear his suit jacket. His tie was gone, the top 2 buttons of his stark white shirt undone, revealing the faint shadow of a dark tattoo on his collarbone. He looked exhausted, the brutal kind of exhaustion that came from making decisions that ruined lives. He stopped when he saw her. He didn't speak. He just watched her standing near his bed. "I'm almost finished, Mr. Costa," Nora said quickly, her voice barely above a whisper. She kept her eyes trained on the edge of the dresser. "I was just organizing the valet tray." "Take your gloves off," Roman said. Nora blinked, looking down at the thick yellow rubber covering her hands. "Sir, take them off. You aren't scrubbing toilets up here. You are handling my personal effects." He walked past her, the heat of his body radiating into the cool air of the bedroom. He went to the wet bar in the corner and grabbed a heavy crystal glass. "I don't want the smell of bleach in my room. Throw them away." "Yes, sir." Nora peeled the gloves off. Her hands felt suddenly naked, vulnerable. She tucked the gloves into her apron pocket, her heart doing a frantic, uneven rhythm against her ribs. She needed to leave. The air in the room was too thick. "I'll fetch your dinner tray now." "You'll stay," Roman commanded softly. He didn't raise his voice. He never did. He simply poured 2 fingers of scotch and turned to face her. "Stand by the window," he said, gesturing with the glass. Nora's legs felt like lead, but she moved. She walked to the massive wall of glass that overlooked the front gates of the estate. The sun was setting, casting long, bloody streaks of orange and red across the manicured lawns. Roman moved to a leather armchair near the window and sat down. He took a sip of his drink, his dark eyes never leaving her profile. "Did you go to the secondary kitchen today?" he asked. The question was casual, but the tone was a steel trap waiting to snap shut. Nora gripped the fabric of her apron. "No, sir. I have been up here since noon, as instructed." "Good." Roman swirled the amber liquid in his glass. "The espresso machine is working again. A different mechanic fixed it. The young one, Finn. He was reassigned." Nora's breath caught. She turned her head, looking at Roman. His face was entirely unreadable, half hidden in the gathering shadows of the room. He was testing her. He was watching for a reaction. "I see," she managed to say. Her throat felt tight. "I hope he wasn't fired. He seemed like a hard worker." The moment the words left her mouth, she knew she had made a mistake. Roman's hand stopped moving. The ice in his glass ceased its quiet clinking. The silence that followed was suffocating. He leaned forward slowly, resting his forearms on his knees. "He seemed like a hard worker," Roman repeated. The words tasted like ash in his mouth. "You formed that assessment in the 3 minutes you spent speaking to him?" I just meant, I know what you meant." Roman cut her off, his voice dropping an octave. "You don't need to concern yourself with the payroll of my organization, Nora. Finn is working the night shift at the shipping yards. He hauls crates in the freezing rain from midnight until 8 in the morning. He will never set foot on this estate again." Nora felt a cold knot form in her stomach. The shipping yards were brutal. It was punishment duty. Men routinely got injured or worse down at the docks. And Finn was sent there because of her, because of one stupid passing joke. "Why?" The word slipped out before she could stop it. A spark of genuine anger pierced through her terror. "He didn't do anything wrong." Roman stood up. The sudden movement made Nora flinch, stepping backward until her shoulders hit the cold glass of the window. Roman crossed the few feet between them, stopping so close she could feel the heat radiating from his chest. He boxed her in, placing one large hand flat against the window pane beside her head. "Because he forgot his place," Roman said, his voice a low, terrifying rumble. He looked down into her wide, panicked eyes. He let his gaze drop to her mouth, lingering there for a fraction of a second before meeting her eyes again. "And because you forgot yours." He didn't touch her. He didn't have to. The pure, localized gravity of his presence held her pinned against the glass. "I paid your father's debt," Roman said softly, leaning in until she could feel his breath on her cheek. "I put a roof over your head. I keep the men who want to collect your blood money away from you. You belong to this house. You do not smile at the hired help. You do not banter with mechanics." "I am a maid," Nora whispered, a desperate tear escaping the corner of her eye. "I am just a maid." Roman reached up, his thumb brushing the tear away from her cheek with startling, terrifying gentleness. His skin was rough, calloused from years of violence, yet his touch was lighter than air. "You aren't just a maid anymore, Nora," he said quietly. "Get my dinner." He stepped back, breaking the spell. Nora gasped for air, practically bolting for the door. She didn't look back. If she had, she would have seen Roman Costa staring at his own hand, his jaw clenched so hard his teeth threatened to crack. The tension in the first-floor dining room was thick enough to choke on. It was a Thursday night. The massive oak dining table had been cleared of food, replaced by scattered ashtrays, crystal tumblers, and blueprints. Roman sat at the head of the table. To his right sat Leo, his stoic, gray-haired underboss. To his left, taking up far too much space, was Victor. Victor ran the drug trafficking rings on the south side of the city. He was an ally, but a volatile one. He was loud, wore too much gold jewelry, and lacked the quiet, terrifying refinement that Roman possessed. Roman despised him, but in this business, you didn't kill an earner unless you had to. "The margins are slipping on the port shipments," Victor complained loudly, slamming a heavy hand on the table. "You're getting too careful, Roman. The feds are blind on the south docks. We can push double the weight if you just sign off." Roman sat perfectly still. He slowly turned his head to look at Victor. "I don't deal in ifs. The heat is on the south docks because your men are sloppy. They talk too much at the bars. They flash cash they shouldn't have. We stick to the current quota." Victor scowled, leaning back in his chair. "You're acting like an old man, Costa." The temperature in the room dropped. Leo shifted his weight, his hands subtly moving toward the inside of his suit jacket. Roman just stared. The heavy doors to the dining room swung open. Nora walked in, carrying a silver tray with a fresh decanter of scotch and a bucket of ice. She kept her head down. Roman had ordered her to serve the meetings now. It was a power play, though she didn't fully understand it. He wanted her in the room. He wanted her visible to him, but invisible to everyone else. She walked toward the table, her cheap gray uniform rustling softly. She approached Victor's side first, as he was closest to the door. She carefully picked up his empty glass to replace it. Victor stopped talking. He turned in his chair, his eyes dragging slowly up Nora's body. He didn't hide his assessment. It was crude and heavy. "Well," Victor slurred slightly, the alcohol loosening his tongue. "Costa finally got some decent scenery in this mausoleum." Nora froze. Her hand trembled as she held the empty glass. She didn't look at Victor. She didn't look at Roman. She stared dead ahead at a painting on the wall. "Fill the glass, Nora," Roman said. His voice was flat, empty. Nora picked up the decanter with her free hand. She leaned forward slightly to pour the scotch over the fresh ice she had tonged into Victor's glass. As she pulled back, Victor raised his hand. He didn't go for the glass. He wrapped his thick, ring-clad fingers around Nora's waist. "What's your name, sweetheart?" Victor asked, pulling her slightly toward him. The world stopped. Nora gasped, stiffening completely. The crystal decanter in her hand rattled violently against the silver tray. Panic seized her throat. She tried to step back, but Victor's grip was like a vice, his thumb pressing into the soft fabric of her uniform. At the head of the table, Roman Costa did not yell. He did not slam his fists. He simply stood up. The movement was smooth, utterly silent, and radiated the kind of lethal intent that made the air pressure change. Leo instantly stood up as well, taking 3 rapid steps away from the table, clearing the firing line. He knew what was coming. Victor looked at Roman, a drunken, confused smirk on his face. "What? Can't a guy be friendly with the staff?" Roman walked slowly down the length of the table. His eyes were not brown anymore. They were black, void of any human warmth or hesitation. He stopped right beside Victor. "Take your hand off her," Roman said. The volume of his voice was conversational. The tone was an executioner's block. Victor's smirk faltered. He looked at the dead, empty expression on Roman's face. The alcohol-fueled bravado evaporated. He realized, a second too late, that he had stepped on a landmine. Victor let go of Nora's waist, raising both hands in mock surrender. All right, relax, just messing around. Didn't know she was off limits." Nora stumbled backward, clutching the tray to her chest as if it could act as a shield. She was hyperventilating, her eyes darting between Roman and the mobster. Roman didn't look at Nora. He looked down at Victor. Before Victor could blink, Roman's hand snapped out. He grabbed a handful of Victor's expensive silk tie, wrapping it around his fist, and slammed the man's face down into the heavy oak table with a sickening wet crunch. Nora screamed, dropping the tray. The crystal decanter shattered across the floor, splashing amber liquid and glass shards over the Persian rug. Victor groaned, blood instantly pouring from his ruined nose, pooling on the blueprints. Roman kept the man pinned to the table by his neck, leaning down so his mouth was inches from Victor's ear. "You don't touch what is mine," Roman whispered, the words filled with a quiet, venomous rage. "You don't look at what is mine. If you ever breathe in her direction again, I will cut off your hands and feed them to the stray dogs behind your own warehouse. Nod if you understand." Victor managed a frantic, muffled nod against the wood. Roman let go, stepping back and straightening his cuffs. He looked at Leo. "Get him out of here. He agrees to the current port quotas. Have his second-in-command handle the logistics moving forward." Leo hauled the bleeding, dazed Victor out of his chair, dragging him toward the door without a single word. The heavy doors shut. The dining room fell into a dead silence, broken only by the sound of Nora's ragged breathing. She was backed into the corner of the room, her hands over her mouth, staring in absolute horror at the blood smeared across the oak table. She was trembling so violently her knees threatened to give out. Roman turned to her. The lethal, cold violence drained from his posture, replaced by a rigid, tense stillness. He looked at the shattered glass around her feet. He looked at her pale face. He had lost control. He had exposed his hand. He had shown an entire room of dangerous men that the quiet maid held absolute leverage over him. He walked toward her slowly, avoiding the broken glass. "Don't," Nora choked out, pressing her back harder against the wallpaper. "Please!" Roman stopped 2 feet away. He looked at the spot on her waist where Victor had touched her. A muscle leaped in his jaw. "He won't touch you again," Roman said softly. "You're crazy," she whispered, tears finally spilling over her lashes. "You're a monster." Roman didn't flinch at the word. He accepted it. He stepped closer, uncaring, as the glass crunched beneath his expensive leather shoes. He reached out slowly, deliberately, and gently gripped her chin, forcing her to look up at him. "I am," Roman agreed, his voice a dark, rough rasp. "I am a monster, and this is my house. Remember that the next time someone else tries to put their hands on you." He dropped his hand and walked out of the room, leaving Nora alone with the shattered glass and the blood on the table. It was 3 cows a.m. The estate was a tomb. Outside, a heavy rain lashed against the bulletproof windows of the master suite, blurring the city lights into smeared streaks of yellow and red. Nora sat on the edge of the leather sofa in Roman's private living room. She hadn't slept. She rarely slept anymore. The echo of the bone crunching against the table played on a loop in her mind. She was trapped in a nightmare, and the monster at the center of it was systematically burning down the world to keep her isolated. The front door to the suite opened with a heavy clack. Nora jumped up, her heart leaping into her throat. Roman stepped inside. He didn't look like the immaculate, untouchable boss who dictated life and death. He looked like a man who had barely survived a war. His dark suit jacket was ruined, torn at the shoulder, and soaked through with rain and something much darker. He leaned heavily against the door frame, his breathing shallow and ragged. His face was pale, his dark hair plastered to his forehead. Nora froze. Her instinct screamed at her to run, to hide in the adjoining room and let his soldiers deal with this. But there were no soldiers. He had dismissed his guards at the gate. He came up here alone. Roman pushed off the door frame, taking 2 stumbling steps into the room before his knee buckled. He hit the floor hard. A low grunt of pain tore from his throat. "Mr. Costa!" Nora moved before she could think. The fear was overridden by sheer, deeply ingrained human panic. She rushed to his side, dropping to her knees on the expensive rug. "Don't touch me," Roman hissed, throwing a hand out to stop her. His teeth were gritted in agony. "You're bleeding," Nora said, her voice shaking. She ignored his command. She reached out and grabbed his arm, trying to help him sit up. His sleeve was soaked. Her fingers came away warm, wet, and crimson. "I need to call someone," she stammered, looking around frantically for his phone. "I need to call Leo, a doctor." "No doctors," Roman snarled, grabbing her wrist with his clean hand. His grip was weak, but his eyes burned with a feral intensity. "No one comes up here. No one knows." "You could die," she yelled at him, the stress of the last 2 weeks finally snapping her control. "You are bleeding to death on the floor, you stupid man." Roman stared at her. Through the pain, through the blood loss, a twisted sort of shock registered on his face. No one yelled at him. No one called him stupid. And certainly not the quiet, terrified maid who had been cowering in the corner 2 days ago. A harsh, breathless laugh scraped out of his chest, turning into a bloody cough. "First aid kit," he rasped, his head dropping back against the base of the sofa. "Master bathroom, under the sink." Nora scrambled to her feet. She ran to the bathroom, tearing through the cabinets until she found a heavy tactical trauma kit. She rushed back, sliding to her knees beside him. "Take the jacket off," Roman grunted. Nora's hands were shaking violently. She helped him peel the ruined, soaked suit jacket off his shoulders. Beneath it, his white dress shirt was a horror show. The bullet had grazed his left shoulder, tearing through the muscle. But a secondary wound, a deep, jagged slash from a knife, ran across his ribs on the right side. He was losing too much blood. "I don't know how to do this," she cried softly, ripping open a package of gauze with her teeth. She pressed a massive wad of cotton against his ribs. Roman hissed, his head rolling to the side. He blindly reached out, his bloody hand finding her hip to steady himself against the blinding pain. The heat of his touch burned through her thin cotton uniform. "Keep the pressure," he ordered, his eyes squeezed shut. "Don't stop." Nora pushed down hard with both hands. The blood seeped through her fingers. She was crying now, silent tears tracking down her pale cheeks. She hated him. She was terrified of him. But as she knelt in his blood, Feeling the heavy, ragged beat of his heart beneath her hands, she realized she was tethered to him in a way she couldn't understand. Minutes ticked by in agonizing silence, broken only by the drumming of the rain against the glass. Slowly, the bleeding began to slow. Roman opened his eyes. They were hazy, dark, and focused entirely on her face. He watched the tears fall from her chin. He watched the absolute terror in her eyes. "Why are you crying?" His voice was a rough whisper in the quiet room. "Because you're dying," she choked out, adjusting her grip on the gauze. "I'm not dying." Roman shifted slightly, wincing. He lifted his hand from the floor, his knuckles brushing lightly against her trembling forearm. "Are you scared of the blood, Nora?" She looked down at him. "I'm scared of you." "Good." Roman's chest rose and fell heavily. "You should be." "Why are you doing this?" she whispered, the question breaking out of her chest. "Why did you put me up here? Why did you ruin that mechanic's life? Why did you almost kill Victor for touching me? I am just a maid. Let me go." Roman's jaw tightened. Even wounded, lying in his own blood, the absolute authority of the man didn't waver. He reached up, his large blood-stained hand wrapping around the back of her neck. He didn't pull her down, but he held her there, locking her in his gravity. "You aren't a maid," Roman said, his voice dropping to a dangerous, intimate register. "And I didn't ruin the mechanic's life. I spared it, because if he had looked at you for one more second in that kitchen, I would have put a bullet in his skull." Nora's breath hitched. She stopped breathing entirely. "I don't share," Roman whispered, his thumb lightly stroking the racing pulse point at the base of her throat. "I don't share my territory. I don't share my power." He pulled her down just a fraction of an inch until their faces were inches apart. He smelled of rain, iron, and violent obsession. "And I will burn this entire city to ash before I let another man look at you." The truth hung in the air between them, heavy and suffocating. It wasn't about control of his staff. It wasn't about security. It was absolute, unhinged possession. Nora stared into his dark, ruthless eyes, her hands still pressed against his bleeding chest, and realized with terrifying clarity that she was never getting out of this house alive. The rain didn't stop. It battered the glass, a relentless driving force that mirrored the frantic beating of Nora's heart. She had taped the heavy gauze to his ribs and wrapped his shoulder tight enough to stop the bleeding. But the quiet that followed was worse than the panic. Roman had passed out. His skin was pale, slick with cold sweat, and his breathing was a shallow, ragged rattle in his chest. Nora sat on the floor beside him, her back pressed against the leather sofa. Her cheap gray uniform was ruined, soaked through with his blood. Her hands were stained a dark, rusty brown. She stared at her fingers, the reality of the night settling over her like a suffocating weight. She could leave. The thought bloomed in the dark corners of her mind. He was unconscious. He was vulnerable. The men at the gate wouldn't stop her if she said she was going out for medical supplies. She could walk out the front door, disappear into the city, and never look back. The monster was bleeding out on his own Persian rug. The cage door was open. Nora slowly turned her head to look at him. His face, usually set in lines of cold, calculating cruelty, was slack. The dangerous aura that commanded rooms and paralyzed men was gone. He just looked like a man, a broken, bleeding man. She stood up, Her legs were shaky, her joints stiff from kneeling on the hardwood floor. She walked to the bathroom, washed the blood from her hands with scalding hot water, and grabbed a clean towel. When she walked back into the living room, she didn't head for the door. She knelt back down beside him and placed the damp towel over his forehead. She didn't stay out of twisted loyalty. She didn't stay out of love. She stayed because she was cynical enough to know how the world worked. If Roman Costa died, the city would tear itself apart in a power vacuum. Men like Victor would slaughter everyone in this house, including the maid who knew too much. Roman wasn't just her captor. Tonight, he was her only shield. At 6 a.m, a heavy knock echoed through the suite. Nora jolted awake. She had fallen asleep sitting on the floor, her head resting against the base of the sofa. Roman was still unconscious, his skin radiating a dry, unnatural heat. The fever had set in. The knock came again, 2 sharp raps. "Boss," Leo's gruff voice called through the thick mahogany door. "We got a problem." Nora scrambled to her feet. She looked at Roman, then at the door. If Leo saw him like this, weak and incapacitated, it could trigger a mutiny. In their world, weakness was a death sentence. She smoothed down her blood-stained apron, took a deep breath, and walked to the door. She unlocked the deadbolt and pulled it open, just a crack. Leo stood in the hallway, dressed in a sharp gray suit, holding a tablet. He stopped when he saw her. His cold, calculating eyes dropped from her pale face to the dark stains on her collar and apron. He didn't blink, but the slight tightening of his jaw gave away his shock. "Where is he?" Leo asked softly, his hand instinctively resting on his suit jacket. "He is sleeping," Nora said. Her voice shook, but she forced herself to meet the underboss's stare. "He doesn't want to be disturbed." Leo leaned forward slightly, trying to look past her into the dim suite. "He missed the morning briefing. That doesn't happen. Step aside, Nora." "No." The word hung in the air. Nora couldn't believe she had said it. Leo could snap her neck with one hand. But she remembered Roman's unhinged declaration hours ago. "I don't share my territory." "He was attacked last night," Nora whispered, keeping her voice low so the guards down the hall wouldn't hear. "He's hurt, but he is alive. If you go in there and see him on the floor, you know what it means for the chain of command." "Let him sleep." Leo stared at her. He processed the blood on her clothes, the desperate fire in her eyes, and the sheer audacity of a maid giving him an order. He slowly pulled his hand away from his jacket. He understood. If the crew knew Roman was down, a war would start before noon. "Victor's men hit one of our warehouses an hour ago," Leo said, his tone shifting. He was no longer talking to the help. He was talking to the gatekeeper. "It was retaliation for the dining room. Tell him when he wakes up." "I will." "Keep the door locked," Leo ordered, turning on his heel. "I'll double the perimeter guard. No one comes up here." Nora shut the door and slid the deadbolt home. She leaned her forehead against the wood, her whole body trembling. She had just crossed a line she could never uncross. She was no longer a captive bystander. She was protecting the throne. A low groan came from the living room. Nora rushed back. Roman was shifting, his eyes fluttering open. The dark brown irises were cloudy with pain and fever, but they locked onto her instantly. "Who was at the door?" he rasped, his voice rough as sandpaper. "Leo," she said, kneeling beside him with a glass of water. "Victor's men hit a warehouse. Leo is handling it." Roman tried to sit up, a sharp hiss escaping his teeth as the torn muscle in his shoulder protested. "Don't move," Nora ordered, pushing firmly against his uninjured shoulder. "You'll tear the stitches." He stopped fighting her. He lay back down, his chest heaving. He looked at the blood drying on her uniform. He remembered her hands pressing into his chest. He remembered her tears. "You stayed," Roman said. It wasn't a question. It was a realization that seemed to shake the very foundation of his violent world. "I didn't have a choice," Nora replied flatly, pressing the cold towel back to his forehead. "You always have a choice," Roman whispered, his eyes heavy as the exhaustion pulled him back under. "You just made the right one." 2 days passed in a tense, claustrophobic blur. Nora didn't leave the suite. She changed bandages, forced Roman to drink water, and answered the door when Leo came for updates. She lied to the underboss with increasing ease, projecting a calm authority she didn't feel. Roman's fever broke on the second night. He was weak, confined to the bed, his torso wrapped in heavy white gauze. He spent hours watching her. Whenever she moved across the room, whenever she brought him food or changed the heavy curtains, his dark eyes tracked her every step. The silence between them was heavy, loaded with a strange, dark domesticity that terrified Nora more than the violence had. On the third night, the estate went pitch black. The heavy hum of the central air conditioning died. The lamps flickered and shut off. Outside, the sprawling lawns were swallowed by absolute darkness. The backup generators didn't kick in. Nora dropped the towel she was folding. The silence was deafening. In the bedroom, Roman sat up instantly. The lethargy of his injuries vanished, replaced by the lethal, coiled energy of a predator cornered in its den. He didn't wince as he threw the heavy duvet off his legs. "Nora!" His voice cut through the dark, a sharp, commanding whip. She ran into the bedroom. "The power!" "I know." Roman stood up, moving stiffly but quickly to the nightstand. He pulled open the drawer. The metallic shuck-shuck of a handgun being racked sounded obscenely loud in the quiet room. "Victor isn't waiting for me to bleed out. He bought out the perimeter guards. The generators are cut." Panic, cold and sharp, flooded Nora's veins. "Leo? If Leo isn't dead, he's fighting his way up here. But we don't wait." Roman walked toward her, holding the matte black pistol in his right hand. His left arm was still heavily bound and useless against his chest. He reached out and grabbed her wrist, pulling her toward the walk-in closet. The closet was massive, lined with custom suits and heavy cedar shelves. Roman pushed her past the clothing racks to the back wall. He pressed his hand against a hidden panel in the wood. A heavy, steel-reinforced door clicked and swung open, revealing a narrow panic room. "Get in!" he ordered. Nora looked at the dark, coffin-like space. Then she looked at Roman. He was barely standing. His face was gray, a fresh patch of red blooming through the white gauze on his side from the sudden exertion. "What about you?" she asked, her voice trembling. "I'm going to kill whoever comes through that bedroom door," Roman said simply. He reached to the small of his back and pulled a second, smaller pistol from his waistband. He shoved it into Nora's hands. The metal was heavy and freezing cold. "Safety is off. You point it at the door. If anyone but me opens it, you pull the trigger until it stops clicking. Do you understand?" "Roman, you're hurt," she pleaded, dropping the formalities. She didn't call him Mr. Costa. The time for titles had burned away. "You can't fight them like this. Come inside with me." Roman stopped. He looked down at her, hearing his name on her lips for the first time. The terror in her eyes wasn't for herself anymore. It was for him. A grim, bloody smile touched the corners of his mouth. He reached out, his thumb dragging across her cheekbone. "I built this empire, Nora. I don't hide in a closet while rats tear it apart." He pushed her firmly into the panic room. "Don't open the door!" He slammed the steel door shut, the heavy deadbolt locked with a final, terrifying clank. Nora was plunged into absolute darkness. The air was stale and tasted of copper. She gripped the heavy gun with both hands, shaking so violently she could barely keep it pointed at the door. Outside, the silence broke. She heard the heavy oak doors of the bedroom kick open. The muffled shouts of men echoed through the walls. Then, the gunfire started. It wasn't like the movies. It was deafening, physical, and chaotic. The concussive blasts rattled the steel walls of her cage. She heard the shattering of glass, the splintering of wood, and the heavy, sickening thud of bodies hitting the hardwood floor. She pressed her back against the far wall, tears streaming down her face, her finger trembling against the trigger. She imagined Roman, bleeding and cornered, fighting off killers to keep them away from this wall. He was a monster. He had trapped her here, but he was throwing his life away to ensure she didn't take a bullet meant for him. The gunfire stopped. A heavy, suffocating silence fell over the suite. Nora couldn't breathe. She strained her ears, listening for a voice. Nothing. Just the faint sound of rain hitting the shattered windows outside. Footsteps. Heavy, dragging footsteps approached the closet. Nora raised the gun, closing one eye, aiming squarely at the center of the steel door. Her heart hammered against her ribs. "If anyone but me opens it, you pull the trigger." The deadbolt clicked. The steel door groaned open. Light from a tactical flashlight swept across the floor, blinding her for a second. "Don't shoot!" The voice was rough, exhausted, and barely recognizable. Nora lowered the gun, gasping for air. Roman stood in the doorway. He was covered in drywall dust and blood. A fresh gash ran down his cheek, and his breathing was incredibly shallow, but his dark eyes were locked entirely on her. He dropped his gun to the floor. It hit the carpet with a dull thud. He didn't say another word. He just collapsed forward. Nora caught him. The sheer weight of him drove her back against the wall, but she wrapped her arms around his waist, holding him up. She buried her face in his uninjured shoulder, the smell of gunpowder and blood overwhelming her senses. She held him, her hands gripping the ruined fabric of his shirt. The monster had survived, and God help her, she was glad. The morning sun broke through the gray clouds, casting a harsh, unforgiving light over the Costa estate. The bedroom was a war zone. The expensive furniture was splintered, the walls chewed to pieces by bullet holes. Two of Victor's men lay dead on the floor, covered by cheap gray tarps Leo had thrown over them. Leo stood by the shattered bay window, smoking a cigarette, his gray suit covered in soot. The mutiny had been crushed. Victor was dead, handled by Leo's loyalists down at the South Docks, while the hit squad tried to take the head of the snake. Roman sat on the edge of the ruined bed. A private doctor, one who asked no questions and charged a fortune, had just finished restitching his side and shoulder. Roman looked hollowed out, but the lethal, terrifying grip he held on the room remained absolute. Nora stood by the bathroom door. She had finally taken off the bloody uniform. She wore one of Roman's black cashmere sweaters, the sleeves rolled up, falling halfway down her thighs. It was a subtle shift, but a monumental one. She wasn't wearing the clothes of the help anymore. She was wearing his clothes. Leo flicked his cigarette out the broken window. He turned to Roman, but his eyes flicked to Nora for a fraction of a second before returning to his boss. "The South Side is secure," Leo reported, his voice flat. "Victor's lieutenants have sworn loyalty. The port margins stay where they are." "Good," Roman rasped, taking a slow sip from a glass of water. "Clean this mess up. I want the windows replaced by nightfall. And Leo." "Yeah, boss." Roman looked up. His dark eyes were cold, devoid of the feverish haze from the night before. "The men who let Victor's squad through the gate, find them." "Already handled," Leo said grimly. "They won't be cashing their final checks." Leo gave a short nod, recognizing the dismissal. As he walked toward the door, he stopped near Nora. He didn't look down at her with the disdain he usually reserved for the staff. He gave a very slight, almost imperceptible nod of his head. An acknowledgement. Respect. He walked out, shutting the splintered door behind him. Roman and Nora were alone. The silence stretched between them, heavy with the weight of the last 3 days. The dynamic had fundamentally changed. The rigid line between master and servant had been obliterated in the crossfire. Roman patted the mattress beside him. "Come here." Nora didn't flinch. She didn't hesitate. She walked across the ruined room, stepping carefully over the bullet casings and shattered glass, and sat down beside him. He reached out, his large, rough hand brushing a stray lock of dark hair behind her ear. His touch was gentle, utterly at odds with the violence surrounding them. "Your debt is paid," Roman said quietly. Nora looked up at him, her heart giving a slow, heavy thump. "The money your father owed," Roman clarified, his eyes tracing the line of her jaw. "It's erased. You don't owe this house another minute of your life." Nora stared at the bloodstains on the floor. She thought about the front gate. She thought about the mechanic, Finn, hauling crates in the rain because she had smiled at him. She thought about the sheer, terrifying possessiveness in Roman's eyes when he dragged a mob boss by the neck just for touching her waist. He was offering her freedom, but it was an illusion. "If I walk out that door," Nora said, her voice steady, "how far would I get before your men brought me back?" Roman didn't lie. He didn't try to dress it up in romance or nobility. He simply dropped his hand to the back of her neck, his thumb resting against her racing pulse. "You wouldn't make it to the end of the driveway," he admitted, his voice a dark, rough purr. "I told you, I don't share." Nora closed her eyes. 2 weeks ago, that statement would have sent her into a panic attack. Now, it just felt like gravity, inescapable, heavy, final. She opened her eyes and looked at him. She saw the monster who controlled a city, the man who ruined lives without a second thought. But she also saw the man who had dragged himself out of a sickbed and stood in front of a steel door to take a bullet for her. She leaned forward, closing the distance between them, and rested her forehead against his chest, right above his heart. The steady, heavy beat of it thudded against her ear. Roman's breath hitched. He wrapped his uninjured arm around her waist, pulling her flush against him, burying his face in her dark hair. He held her with a desperate, ironclad grip. like a man drowning who had finally found the surface. She had lost her freedom, but she had gained a king. She was the only thing in the world Roman Costa bowed to. She was the cage that held the monster, and as she sat in the ruins of the bedroom, enveloped in his scent of bergamot and blood, Nora realized she didn't want to leave. The invisible maid was dead. The queen of the syndicate had just been born. What a twisted, intense ride. From an invisible maid to the untouchable queen of the underworld, Nora realized that surviving a monster sometimes means taming him. Did she make the right choice staying with Roman? Or has she just locked herself in a gilded cage forever? If this dark, high-stakes mafia romance kept you on the edge of your seat, smash that like button. Share this story with your friends who love a gritty, possessive drama. Don't forget to subscribe and ring the notification bell so you never miss our next thrilling story. Drop a comment below. What would you have done in Nora's shoes? See you in the next video.